Hello and welcome to the Society with Fatma Shaheen at PTV World. Now, typically we all understand the fact that when a marriage starts, it does start on a happy note. But having said that, we cannot even ignore the fact that in the past few years, we've seen that the divorce rate in Pakistan has been on a surging high. What are the reasons for the same? This is exactly what we'll be talking about in our today's show. We'll also be talking about the changing trends of divorce as they do exist in the Pakistani society. We'll be talking about how divorce just doesn't affect those who are directly involved in it, but what kind of an impact does it have on the society at large. Last but not the least, we'll also be talking about the psychological impact of divorce and how, if at all, can we all come together to prevent divorce, because divorce at the end of the day is something which does emanate from the society, so it needs to have a societal solution as well. This and much more to follow on today's show, and to do that, let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Ms. Sara Gandapur, who is a journalist. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're most welcome. My second panelist for the show today is Dr. Iram Amir, who is an assistant professor of psychiatry. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
It's my honor. Thank you.
You're most welcome. And my third panelist for the show today is Ms. Samavia Sajjad, who's a lawyer alongside being a social activist. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Now, to get the conversation started with you, Sara, I think for basics we need to address the fact that, you know, in Pakistan, unfortunately, the divorce rate has been on a surging high. So, as a journalist, as also, of course, a social worker, what reasons do you attribute to the same?
I think to begin with, the main reason for the divorce rate going really high is mainly because I feel now that the couples, not only women, but the men also have a lot more awareness, and they are more forward thinking and more liberal as well. So when it comes to a marriage, which is like a contract, and it's about two individuals living together and, you know, facing life and its challenges together.
Right.
So for them to not be compatible in a marriage once they live under the same roof, so it's easier for them to accept that, I
Right.
believe, as opposed to previous decades where, you know, there was a lot of social pressure, there was family pressure, and, you know, and also the fact that, like, you know, it's a social issue. So how would you be accepted in the society post a divorce, right?
But do you not feel that, you know, this is something which generally just applies to the urban elite? Because I still feel that, you know, in the rural areas of Pakistan, there's still this hesitancy to walk away from unhappy marriages, more so when it comes to women. I'll come to you, Doc Sahib. I think you'll be in a better position to tell us that when we talk about, you know, the ever-evolving, changing divorce trends as they do exist, not only in the urban areas in Pakistan, but also in the remote areas, how do you compare and contrast? Because I think one thing which is very glaringly, you know, obvious is the fact that more women are now open to, you know, seeking divorce, as, you know, compared to what was the case in the previous, you know, few decades.
There's a line that demarcates the urban and the rural population of Pakistan, not only on the basis of the rights that they have, also because of the problems of stigma and taboo that are attached with this particular topic that we're discussing. Day in and day out, I see women who are domestic abuse victims, who are suffering at the hands of their partners, and yet they're not able to identify it as a trigger because of the fact that they come in the psychiatric OPD. They present with depression, anxiety, with PTSD, but they're not able to identify the abuse as a trigger to this situation.
Right.
And because of the lack of rights, the lack of awareness, and the lack of financial stability in the future, they do not opt for this reason.
And most importantly, Dr. Sahib, I think because of that social cultural taboo which is, you know, attached unfortunately with women who want to, you know, set aside their marriage wedlock. So I think these are all the things which actually inhibit them to come forward and ask for a divorce, on which I'll come to you, Samavia, because if you go through the statistics, you know, we see that over a period of time, you know, more women are now willing to come forward and actually file a suit for dissolution of marriage, and this is something which we commonly see in courts today. So how do you explain that, you know, considering that she is of the opinion that women are, you know, they feel very stigmatized and they would rather not talk about divorce, such as not to bring shame to the family, but at the same time we also see women going to courts and, you know, filing their cases of khula. So how do you reconcile both these things?
Yeah, so legally speaking, it has become very easier for women to seek dissolution of marriage. It's not at all difficult, but I would agree with her to certain extent that yes, there is certain social stigma attached. But I think in this context, when we talk about dissolving of a marriage, it's more about, it varies from a woman to women.
Right.
Each individual has different capacity, each individual has different background, different psychological factors and different attitude towards
and
life.
also, Samavia, this support system, because I think a
Yeah.
lot of times we see women
Yes.
filing for a divorce is because they know at the end of the day, tomorrow, if divorce is granted to them,
Yeah.
they do have a support system to fall back on. So I think, again, we can't generalize. It all depends on the particular circumstances
Yeah.
of that particular woman,
Yes.
what kind of a socioeconomic
True.
class she belongs to, what kind of a support system she
True.
has.
Yeah.
But coming to you, Sarah, I think when we talk about divorce, we must just not confine it to how it impacts the couples who are, directly involved in it. We must also see that, publicly, what kind of, impression or effect it has on the society at large. Because, in a society like ours, which places so much importance to the institution of marriage, we can't deny the fact that, an increasing divorce rate has that tendency of eroding our family institution.
Definitely, Ji. Okay, so I think to begin with, what we need to do is, being from the media, I think it's part of our job to report on things that are positive that are happening in the society as well, only not just concentrating or focusing on the negatives.
Right.
So if a divorce is taking place and it is on the rise, so we must look at the reasons behind that, number one. Number two, to keep it short and sweet, I think we need to take that public awareness to each household that's watching. So the best way to do that is to do through awareness campaigns that we can, the government can take out through throughout the media, and you can focus on social media. And I think we've already done that. I've personally been a part of many campaigns which were talking about, it's okay to get help if you are depressed. It's okay to go to a psychiatrist or to get, help from a doctor if you're, thinking about divorce or anything.
Right.
So that plays a very important role in the mental health of people who are going through divorce. And lastly, I would quickly add that, our religion, Islam, is the first religion in the world which actually gave the rights of a divorce and a khula to the women and the men. And it's not only limited to men, that they have the the liberty of divorcing anytime they want or anyone they want, but it's also given to the right was given to women, that if they were not happy in a marriage, and especially let alone an abusive marriage, so they had the right to actually not continue to live with that
Basically, and I
partner.
think this is something that we see being done very rampantly now, because I think this in a way also has a converse argument, because I think a lot of people also say that since it is by law very easy to actually dissolve a marriage contract, this is in itself is also a reason why we see there to be a surge in the divorce cases. So I think this is something which applies both ways, but of course we can't deny the fact that Islam was one of the very first religions which gave women that right. But I think coming to you in this regard, Sarah has raised some very valid points, that when we talk about the psychological impact of divorce, this is unfortunately something that we don't talk about as a society, more so when it comes to men, I believe, because I think men face that taboo. There are certain kind of stereotypes that men can't get emotionally hurt, or if they do get emotionally hurt, they will be judged perhaps if they talk about it openly. So as somebody who has that benefit of dealing so many cases like these, how do you tackle such cases? Because I'm sure it must be very challenging for you as well to actually help people out when they are not wanting to get help that way.
Said there are gender differences in the psychological impact of any outcome. Divorce being an outcome, there can be a positive impact, there can be a negative impact. And the gender differences come into play when we have different expressions of the emotions that we are feeling, and the different behaviors that we exhibit in order to show the grief that we have. So in our part of the culture, it's very common, it's very natural for a woman to shed tears, to be hysterical, to show some anger, to show some resentment, to be angry at anything that she faces and she believes that she is a victim of.
Right.
But men in our society are usually considered to be the ones who are the abusers, They're considered to be the one who are the aggressors because of their biological tendencies.
Although that is not the case every time,
It's
because
not
we
the
do
case.
see men also, you know, divorce does take a toll
I
on
think
them.
in the past,
Although
no.
interestingly enough, Dr. Saib, I would want you to comment on, you know, these findings of a report I came across. It suggests that, you know, whereas women are, of course, you know, more emotionally impacted by a divorce, men are the ones who actually, you know, they are very quick to move on with their lives. Like you would find them in a relationship or for that matter another marriage soon after the divorce. So is that like practically true?
I think it is to some extent true. It cannot be generalized as a rule for everybody. Some of the people, they are in need of an attachment. Their childhood tendencies puts them in a position where they have an insecure pattern of attachment.
Right.
So they want to see relationships in that context, and when they are adults, they carry on that pattern of attachment. But ultimately, if they're moving on very quickly, if they're not thinking about it, they're impulsive in seeking another partner, and they're not ready to work on the problem areas that they already have, may it be anger issues, or may it be emotional issues, or may it be the lack of commitment, or it may be the lack of intelligence in certain cases.
Right, and I think Dr. Saib, in this regard, it's very important for us to highlight the fact that when we talk about, you know, grieving, it has to be there, because until and unless you grieve something, you can't properly get out of that.
Yes, pathological grief can lead into depression. There are various stages of grief, and it has to be processed in a natural flow. And if you're not passing through those passages of grief, those stages of grief in a natural way, it can lead to resentment, it can lead to emotional problems, it can lead to behavioral issues. Maladaptive coping strategies at the end, like we talk about substance abuse, we talk about depression, addictions,
alcohol abuse
Yes.
as well, so many other things, so to speak, on which I'll come to you, Samavi. I think something which Sarah also very rightly so mentioned earlier, that when we talk about divorce, I think there is a misconception in our Pakistani society that when it comes to women seeking divorce, or for that matter dissolving their marriage contracts, it's more difficult for them as compared to their male counterparts. So do you agree with this statement?
I agree with you, Fatma. I think it's very easy for women to go out there and get divorced now, because all they have to go and say is that they are not happy with their spouse or with a particular person. So I think legally our courts and our law has made it very easy for women to go out there and seek dissolution. But when it comes to the social stigma, that comes into play, and that's when it becomes extremely difficult for men and women to get out of unhappy marriages. Because usually they are under the presumption that once they go through the process, what will happen is that the society will look down on them, or the society, they will not have the same respect in the society.
That level of acceptability will not be there, basically.
Yes. And that happens in the family as well, and when they go out there professionally as well.
And I think a lot of times we see more often than not that, you know, this level of reluctance is also shown when women go out to actually initiate such proceedings, because I'm sure you must have come across this as a lawyer yourself, that, you know, that is the time when the family comes in and they try to actually solve the matter, which in itself is of course good, but in the event that it doesn't move towards an amicable settlement, then of course it is a woman's right to, you know, walk out of an abusive marriage. Coming to you, Sarah, I think a stigma is something which she very rightly pointed on, which I would want you to deliberate further. I personally feel that over a period of time, at least in our urban elite, at least in our urban cities, women to a great extent have been successful in, you know, moving past this stigma and shame of basically getting a divorce. But then what about the rural area, something which she also pinpointed, that, you know, when we talk about stigma, when we talk about shame, when we talk about divorce, of course this is something which has to, you know, have a holistic solution at the end of the day.
To be very honest, I believe that in the rural areas, the divorce is already taking place, and multiple women I know of, at least I can point out a few cases who have actually moved past divorce and they've moved on to marry another man along with the children from the previous marriage. And it's not as bad as we think, you know, honestly, because now with all the technology and with all the, you know, the modern world, it's even your villages have satellite services.
I think media, especially social media,
and media
so
has
many
played
things.
such a big role. And then never forget the power of media, because, you know, it's actually reached out to, you know, beyond the modern you know, people. And now it's with the common the working class, or let's say the underprivileged people. I think another reason why I feel that this is happening is because when the two partners want to split and the families are not supporting them or they're supporting them, I think the biggest point of friction between the, you know, the men and the women or the partners is the custody, where it comes in play that, you know, who gets the custody. And naturally the law and the Sharia law also would prefer that the younger children should be with the mother
till a certain age. Yes,
yeah, till
I
a
think these are
certain
the
age.
issues that we'll talk about when we talk about, you know, women being more open and more confident of stepping out of unhappy marriages, something perhaps which we didn't see in our mothers or our grandmothers' times. Do you not feel that, you know, media per se has played a big role in this? And I think for the better as well as for the worse, this is something that we need to, you know, study and debate upon from both angles.
But
because
when you spread awareness, see, it always has pros and cons. But I think the pros in this aspect have been more positive, because, you know, now women know what is right and wrong. It's okay to be in, you know, in a marriage where both the parties are being treated equally, or a little bit, you know, upper and higher and lower. But when you're being hit, women now know. I mean, I think you guys
and I think
will
these are the
agree
issues
with
which
me.
are all interlinked, because domestic violence and, you know, any kind of abuse, trauma, divorce, of course, all these things go together, on which I'll come to you, madam. I think we must talk about this from the viewpoint of children as well. When we talk about, you know, divorce impacting children, how do you feel does it impact children, not only for the worse but also for the better?
As a mental health practitioner, I think there are two important points to see in this case: the age of the child and the gender of the child. Because in our society, we imply different roles to different genders in our culture and in the religion as well. So children usually, when they're living in disruptive households where there's abuse, there's neglect, there's trauma, they can be victims of psychological problems. For example, they can have issues with generalized anxiety. They can have dropouts from schools. They can have
serious mistrust issues too.
And their future relationships can be built on those mistrust issues. That is why they might not be comfortable in getting married themselves. So the age at which the child is would determine how their coping mechanisms are. Very young children would not be very aware of the problems between the parents. But the teenagers and the preteens are very, very vulnerable to such problems.
And I think this is something which actually gets imprinted in their minds, and you know, this is something which they carry through.
If you're having a childhood that is traumatic, it involves abuse, or it involves any form of rejection or humiliation that they see. If the parents are having a discord, they feel humiliated publicly.
This is exactly why, madam, I pose this question, because I think it's very unfair that we always talk about the negative psychological impacts of divorce. A lot of times we even see, you know, couples emerging out to be very positive, very successful post their divorces too.
I'm glad you brought up this point, because I see a lot of children at my clinic, and I see very, very positive outcomes in their personality. Once the parents decide to have a timeout, once the parents decide to have a separation, when one of the parents moves out of the house, the hostile environment settles, so they have more time to focus on themselves, they have more time to reflect, the studies, the pattern of concentration improves, and then they can they also conform to different gender roles. For example, if the male parent is not present in the household, the younger children, they start taking up the responsibilities of the male parent. Similarly, the young females who are living with single mothers, or who are living in families where there's a stepmother or their half siblings, they tend to become more resilient towards life. So this brings out a positive side out of them.
Right, madam, your point is noted on, which I'll come to you, Samavi. I think a very important point which we must not, you know, forget to address during the course of today's show is the post-divorce issues, because I think that is something which we usually don't talk about, but which is equally important. So when we talk about, you know, post-divorce issues, what do you feel are the most important things that we need to keep in mind, both from the wife's perspective as well as from the husband's perspective?
So firstly, talking about the wife's perspective, I think the division of financial asset is the most tricky and the most area in which the women are led back by our society and by the legal system as well. Because we come from the society where men are supposed to be the sole earner, or the majority of the income is driven by the men and household. So the house or property or any assets are under a man's name or the husband's name. Once they go through divorce, female has no legal rights towards the assets which are already under men's name.
Right.
All they are entitled to is the divorce during the maintenance during the iddat period. So women is left, I think, in a very vulnerable state like that, because she does not have that type of financial security as the men does, although even though if she's not earning, she's still looking after the house.
Right.
And that calls for the equal partnership in the end.
And I think it's very important for us to tell people that when we talk about, you know, a woman's post-divorce rights, in Pakistan, she doesn't get that right to a maintenance following her divorce. So if she wants to claim, you know, financial assistance or maintenance for that matter, then that has to be done during the subsistence of the marriage.
Yes, she has to go through the entire process during her marriage, maybe go to the relevant legal department and get things under her name as well, and that is the only security she has, and that has to happen during marriage.
And I think in this regard we must also talk about child custody arrangements, which I think are a very important and, you know, very pressing bone of contention between the couples per se, because sometimes we see that people are, you know, intelligent enough, emotionally intelligent to opt for co-parenting, but other times we see that, you know, they actually engage themselves in very long, lengthy and adversarial process of litigation, which of course not only has a negative effect upon themselves but on the children as well. So how do you feel can we reach amicable solutions in this regard, more so after divorce, because I think divorce itself takes such a big toll on you.
And the post-divorce experience in this regard is detrimental to the father figure.
Right.
Because our courts, being very female friendly, have come about and given rights to the women, and it is a very positive thing as well. But at the same time, it has been detrimental to the male in such a way that children are mostly given, the custody of the children is given to the wife or the female. So now, being a unit, a child needs his father as well. He needs a father figure in his life as well. And usually the father is only given the right to meet the child in the court presence. There's a separate room area in the court where a father can meet the child, and that is also for 3 hours. The child cannot spend any night with his father once the custody is being given to the mother.
And the same could be the case in the case of the mother, although of course that is very unlikely,
that is
because
rare,
women do get a preferential right that way.
Sarah,
coming to you, I think Madam has been very kind enough to explain the whole legalities on this, but when we talk about again the social angle of this, I think we cannot ignore the fact that COVID-19 has also contributed to the increasing divorce rate, not only in Pakistan but world over. And you know, considering that we are still living through the pandemic, I think the pandemic stresses remain. So do you feel that this will continue to have an impact on marital breakdown as we, you know, continue to live through this pandemic?
I think the impact is there. It's going to remain there for a long time, and not only when it comes to a marriage. I think it also affects, it has greatly affected you know, the relationship between the parents and the children.
Right.
And I've actually come to notice that, you know, during this pandemic, where there was the negative effect, there was a positive effect as well. And I think that young parents especially got to spend more time with their children while the father or the mother was away to work, and you know, the children had their own lives. So I always try to remain positive, because when you're negative about everything and you can't continuously blame the system for everything.
Of course.
So you're also responsible. We are also responsible as a society.
Very right.
So yes, the pandemic has affected people, but at the same time, it's brought families closer as well.
Right. And I think this has been a blessing in disguise, because you know, most of the divorce cases that I've come across, and I think Samavia, you would bear with me on this, were the ones which were actually there were weak relationships to start off with. There was actually a crack in the foundation to start off with.
Right.
So I think the pandemic kind of maybe showed them the way, that too maybe for their betterment at the end of the day.
Or it showed them that, you know, it was impossible for them to remain together. And I think it also kind of worked out, because sometimes an abusive marriage is not visible to the people outside, even the close family relatives. Dr. Saib will agree with me.
Right.
And this enabled the close family members or extended family to also see that there was something really wrong with the marriage.
On which I'll come to you, madam. I think a very important issue which we must address today is the fact that we see a lot of times women kind of, you know, blaming themselves for the divorce. They want to seek the divorce, they seek the divorce, but at some level or the other they feel that, you know, it's because of them. although it might be a no-fault divorce at the end of the day. So this shame element where women, usually blame themselves for the marriage falling apart, how do you cater to this?
Because I think the society has a picture of an idealistic mother, an idealistic wife, and we as part of the society, the social fabric of society, we want to completely reflect and we want to completely be molded into that perfect role of being the mother, the wife, but I think these are unrealistic expectations. Because of this excessive pressure the society puts on women, they're bound to feel that they failed themselves, they failed their children. But I see that there's a difference, there's a change. The trend is there that women feel empowered after taking such decisions. Right. Because sometimes the thing that they look forward is that they have, at the end of the day, they have their children to raise, they have financial independence. But if you are right, some people do have a tendency to fall into this pit of depression where they have low self-esteem, they have this feeling of inadequacy. So we offer them.
I think it's also the societal pressures.
Yes.
Because a lot of times women want to walk out of unhappy, abusive marriages, but they just are in it because they feel that, if he tomorrow walk out, log kya kahenge.
Exactly.
That typical thinking basically. It happens to men as well. But I think more to women, because I think
if such people are coming to our practice, I think what we help them in understanding is that it's all right to fail at certain things at times.
It's all right not to be
it's
okay.
All right
but
not
madam,
to
when
be
it comes
in
to
that
counseling them, I think this is an extremely important thing which we must talk about, on today's show, that marriage counseling, seeking marriage therapy, that is something very common which we see in the Western jurisdiction. But in Pakistan, do you see this to be a common occurrence? Because I at least feel, looking at it from a bystander's perspective, that a lot of, separations and divorces could perhaps be avoided if you seek, intervention timely.
I'm happy to report that there are a lot of people who are coming in the practice of seeking marital counseling and marital therapy and family therapy as well. I would like to point out that it's not everybody's domain to practice this. It's a specialized field. People have spent a lot of time in doing the coursework and updating themselves in the recent evidence-based researches. So I just wanted to point out that not every psychologist and not every psychiatrist can do marital counseling and family therapy.
I think it's very specialized at the end of the day, because there are so many emotions involved and you need to do everything in such a precise, quantified manner, because a marriage is at stake because of you. I think lawyers like yourself, they also have a very important role to play in this regard, because a lot of times we see cases, divorce cases possibly, going to lawyers for consultation, and a lot of times we also see the same lawyers being the arbitrators or mediators, and they help them resolve those issues. So has that ever happened with you?
Yes, actually. So any person, any male or female who comes to me for divorce, my first priority is just to list down the issues, or to help them sort of counsel, or sort of get into that zone where it is possible to continue living happily.
Right.
And at many times I've recommended them to consult a professional as well, to go out there, consult a psychiatrist or a psychologist who can help them resolve their issues.
Right.
So there are certain issues which a lawyer themselves can point out, then obviously you have to refer them to a professional as well.
Right.
So yeah, that has happened many times, and I would completely agree with Iram on this context that yes, there are people who are actually willing to go seek help out there and see if the matter could be dissolved rather than seeking divorce.
Right. And I think in this, lawyers, they also need to play a very proactive role, because a lot of times we also see lawyers right away jumping to filing divorce suits at the end of the day, because I think if not anything, morally and ethically we do owe this responsibility to people who come to us for advice, that we do their cases with the best of their interests, just not our interests. On which I'll come to you, Sarah, and to conclude today's show, I think it's very important for us to talk about ending marriage wedlock, but that too in a very dignified and respectful manner, because a lot of times we see that it does become, unfortunately, a very dirty, or for that matter a bitter process. So in this regard, what advice would you give to all the people out there, more so those who want to actually end their marriage wedlock, that how can they do the same in a civil, humane and a respectful manner?
I think to begin with, I think it's the responsibility of the parents to give better awareness to their daughters and sons as well prior to the marriage taking place, and at the time of the nikah. It's very important that they know the rights man's rights and a women's rights in a marriage.
Right.
Once we are aware of that, and Islam, again, like I mentioned before, gives a lot of rights to the man and to the women as well. So once aware of those rights, I think and then later on, if unfortunately, if the marriage contract does not work out, right, and the partners want separation, so they're, first of all, to begin with, they know their rights, right, and number two, they must think of the children, because there's going to be a separation or a divorce any case, but if the children are involved and the parents think smartly and emotionally that, you know, okay, we are not getting along, but you know, you can't make the children decide or choose, because a father is a father and a mother is a mother. They can't take each other's
be a rolling ball
places,
between
right?
the parents.
So as long as the parents understand that and the parents' families understand that, because I've seen a lot of fathers suffering post-divorce because their wives they take out their animosity, you know, in the shape of...
They're poisoning the children against them.
Yes, you know, separating the children. And I've seen a lot of men suffer, and similarly, in some cases, women.
Right, Sarah, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, Dr. Saiba. I think a very important point which we must talk about before we conclude today's show is the mere fact of post-divorce trauma, something which I feel isn't talked about much in our Pakistani society, because it is a reality. A lot of couples, even children for that matter, undergo it. So as a psychiatrist out there, what role do you feel can, you know, family members, what role can, you know, friends of such divorced couples play in order to kind of mitigate the negative effects of divorce on any persons who unfortunately has to go through it?
I would just like to advocate the role of including these people back into society and not discriminating them on the basis of an event that happened to them. Including them in a way that they were exactly this, behaving with them in exactly the same way you were behaving with them before this incident happened, and then talking about it, reflecting upon it, and then narratives should be heard. The people who are going through divorce, who have gone through separations, should talk about their experiences in a meaningful way. What could work is linking these people together and forming a form of a group where these things can be discussed. It can be a form of a therapy. Rather than going to a therapist individually, they can sit down together, talk and reflect upon what happened and what they can do in order to improve their possible limitations and what sort of coping mechanisms that they can try.
Right. Then I think in this regard, they need to introspect and, you know, perhaps use this opportunity to self-reflect on what went wrong and possibly, you know, use that opportunity to actually avoid the same in future. On which I'll come to you, Samavia, and to conclude today's show, what would your recommendations be, especially when it comes to, you know, improving our laws and policies such that, you know, per se, they in themselves, you know, kind of deter people from seeking divorce?
I think the major responsibility also lies in our court system, because now we give option to the courts do give option to the couple to reconcile, but I think that should be moved towards professional help, like a proper therapy or a counseling. Like we have seen in West that couples are often resorted to therapy for 3 months once even they come to the courts. So I think that is going to deter the divorce rates in itself. Secondly, the major weapon the men have is that they know that all they will have to give women is their haq meher or any dower articles which have been registered in the nikah nama prior to signing the social contract.
That's
that is
right.
your nikah. So, or they are very quick to give divorce in that sense, because they know that all
because
the assets,
there are no financial repercussions.
they have gained or they have earned during the marriage are going to remain under the men's name. So inclusion of female or a ratio or an equitable share would, I think, be a very good change in our legal system or in our law.
Right.
And thirdly, when it comes to the raising of a child, I think why female feel more comfortable to get divorces, because they know the custody is automatically going to fall towards them. They don't realize the financial repercussions per se.
And you know, in this regard, I would want to add that, you know, there are countries in which, you know, the financial responsibility of maintaining a child post the divorce is completely put on the woman herself, which in itself, of course, kind of deters her from seeking a divorce, because she knows that tomorrow, if she walks out of this marriage, she will be the one who will be the sole, you know, breadwinner, not only for herself herself but for the child too. So, you know, perhaps different kinds of changes in our laws as well as in our policies and system in this regards, such that people think twice before walking out of such marriages. On which note, I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, Ms. Sara. Thank you so much, Dr. Saiba. And thank you so much, Samavia, for being here with us today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about the increasing divorce rate as it does exist in the Pakistani society today, whereas of course there's no denying to the fact that divorce per se is a very detested thing. Having said that, in the event that people do decide to go forward with it, it must, you know, be done in a very respectful, it must be done in a dignified and in a civil manner. Last but not the least, when it comes to, you know, moving past divorce and post-divorce life, I think the way one perceives it is something which is very subjective, it's something very personal. Only the people who undergo it should have the right to decide, you know, whether they want to be the hero of their own stories or for that matter a mere victim of it. On that note, signing off for today. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.